along with the League Championship Series, and some are rooting for Canada, some are rooting for the U.S., and some are rooting against the Cubs or for the Cubs. This guy moves all around the country, and we will be gathering together because I run into him once or twice a year on Sunday at the Meadowlands. He is the longtime voice of New York Giants football. He has seen the good, the bad, and the ugly. He does a lot of golf, a lot of serious NFL radio, and you can follow his journey out on Twitter at BobPapa_NFL, one of our defending champions and one of my favorite dudes in this business. Bob Papa back on WNST. What's going on, Bob? How's life, man?
Man, everything's good. How are you doing?
I'm all right.
You got it cranking.
Well, I mean, it's football season. We would have had it cranking more if, Zach Britton would have come into the game last week, I think.
Buck would have used the reliever, right? But then, after the Mets used their reliever, maybe Buck was right.
Yeah, it's funny, man. Like, I know you a little bit off the air, and as much as you call football and golf, you're like a real sports fan, right? Like, you're a guy trying to watch these baseball games at 2 in the morning as much as the next guy and the Cubs and the legend of all that. You love baseball, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, my family, both my mother's family and my father's family, grew up right around Yankee Stadium. I mean, within blocks, and I'm from the Bronx, so like my entire family history is intertwined with the Yankees. My grandfather used to be basically like the head of maintenance in that Bronx County courthouse that overlooked right field. In fact, when I was a kid, before they remodeled the stadium in '76, so this is going back to '73, I was only about 7 or 8 years old.
They were playing games at Shea Stadium, right, for a couple weeks, right?
74 and 75, Shea, but in '72, '73 with the old stadium, before they remodeled it, my grandfather a couple times took me up on the roof with him because they hadn't, before they remodeled the stadium, you could actually look into the stadium from the Bronx County Courthouse. Now, you couldn't see a whole chunk of right field. You saw about half of it. And he had binoculars, and he kept in his little locker, and my grandmother would make lunch. We would watch Yankee games from the roof of the Bronx County Courthouse.
Bologna sandwiches or something, right?
Yeah, it was a little bit more Italian than that.
Bob Papa, join us there. All right, man, so let's get to the game. I mean, obviously, from the Ravens side of this, right, this is a code red. I mean, they fired their offensive coordinator on Monday. I started thinking, if that's not a code red, benching a quarterback, firing a kicker, firing the head coach. I mean, these are the only sort of code reds you have in Week 5. The Ravens are trying to shake things up, and certainly the Giants, and then we play the Jets next week. These feel like a couple of train rides up where you could be bandits in the night and steal a couple of road games if you're a Ravens fan right now.
Why not? Why not? If you're a Ravens fan, why wouldn't you think you can go win this game? I mean, the Giants and Ravens look very familiar right now, don't they? They look a lot like the same team. I watched last week in Green Bay. I watched a big chunk of almost the whole Baltimore game with my little DirecTV Sunday Ticket app on my phone because the game wasn't being shown in Green Bay.
Isn't it an incredible thing, dude, like this whole technology thing? I mean, I'm watching football games in Tokyo. I mean, the guy that saved my wife's life is from Germany. He and his buddies, every Sunday night, 7 o'clock, they go out. I mean, the game is so much bigger than it was when we were kids and I was rooting for the Colts, right? I mean,
I know. It's changed fandom in a big-time way, which is why you see more and more visiting fans in stadiums is because of all this technology, and people can now be fans of whatever they want to be. I mean, I had my phone up on the little desk in Green Bay while the Eagles and Lions were on TV. I was working on my boards for the Rams game trying to get ahead, and I'm watching the Ravens game live. It doesn't get any better than that.
Well, and then the other part of it is when they play the London games, you're like, oh, hell, we got to get up at 9:30 in the morning. There's a game on. I mean, and some pretty significant games in the next couple of weeks coming up as well. It's sort of nonstop go, and the Giants at this point, I 3 losses in a row. I'm a little bit shocked. You're in this Ben McAdoo and Coughlin. I mean, how has this whole transition gone? I mean, probably pretty well after week 2, right, Bob?
Yeah, it was going along swimmingly, and it's hit a major roadblock. Look, I think Ben McAdoo is going to stay the course. You're going to hear all the right things being said. I think they're stunned right now. I think they're stunned that they've lost these 3 games in a row. They had the Redskin game in complete control, and then it just started to unravel, and they started doing a lot of things that they did last year where they were dropping balls, they were turning it over. You know, you have first and goal at the 5, you get called for a personal foul penalty. Next thing you know, the ball's moved back to the 20-yard line, and then a receiver cuts off his route and the quarterback throws an interception. You get no points out of it. And they got away with some things. You know, Carl Banks, who I do the games with on radio, and I were talking about this. They got away with stuff in the first 2 weeks. And I caution Giant fans. I'm like, you can't keep losing the turnover battle. You can't keep not getting turnovers. You can't keep dropping touchdown passes and making mistakes on third down or whatever and expect to win. They got away with it in week 1 against Dallas because it was the first game for Dak Prescott and Ezekiel Elliott. You know, that incarnation of the Cowboys as compared to what we're seeing now. I don't know if the Giants would have won in week 1. Week 2, you beat the New Orleans Saints. Think about this. They beat the New Orleans Saints, and they didn't score an offensive touchdown. The only touchdown they had in the game was a block punt return for a touchdown. Now, you look at what the Saints gave up in week 1. Look what the Saints gave up in week 3. Look what the Saints gave up in week 4. And look what the Saints came up in week 5. They give up a ridiculous amount of points, 35 a game. The Giants didn't even score an offensive touchdown. So you can't look at these things and just skip along merrily and say, oh, we're 2-0. They went against a banged-up Dallas defense. They went up a banged-up Saints defense. I mean, look, the other night they were going up against a pass defense in the Packers that's giving up 307 yards a game in the air, and their 2 starting corners were out, yet it looked like the Packers had 17 defenders on the field. So there's some things that are fundamentally wrong that they've got to fix, because I think teams they understand what the Giants are trying to do offensively and how they're trying to attack defenses, and they're completely prepared for it, and they're just shutting it down.
Well, both teams felt like they were going to be able to run the ball, and both teams have had problems on the offensive line. Ravens from a health standpoint, the Giants from a competency standpoint. And when the O-line's a mess, you can't protect the quarterback, and when the O-line's a mess, you can't get a running game going. And obviously the Giants have, as much as the Ravens think they have 3 guys that could actually be a running back here, the Giants are trying to find one at this point. The Vereen thing's a big deal, right?
Marine's a big deal. Jennings has been out the last couple of weeks because of his thumb. I know that, look, neither guy is Adrian Peterson. Neither guy is Todd Gurley. But in the Giants' offense, and the way the Giants' offense has been constructed in this era, meaning this Super Bowl winning era of Eli Manning, they've never had the bell cow back. It's always been a group. It's been Jacobs and Bradshaw and Ward or Drones, and we could go through the list of names. So it's always been a little bit by committee. But now they're down to the bare minimums here, because now you're counting on Orleans Darkwa, Bobby Rainey.
Well, Bobby Rainey was like our star of the second and third preseason games for like 3 years here. I mean, Bobby Rainey spent a lot of time here and was always a guy that looked really good in the preseason. You thought, well, maybe one day he'll get a job, probably like Justin Forsett, who bounced around in a million places. And, I mean, there's no reason to think Bobby Rainey can't run for 85 yards on Sunday, right?
No, Bobby Rainey has been productive for them so far. He's been a pleasant surprise, and they look very smart keeping him instead of keeping Andre Williams. The problem with Bobby Rainey, if you look at his career arc, is he fumbles too much. And does not protect the football the way you want it to, and you're just kind of waiting for that, in that big spot, is he going to fumble it and kill a drive? But the offensive line has been bad. Man, the offensive line has been bad, and this is an offensive line that they really didn't address in the offseason. These are the same starting 5 that they rolled out last year that they brought back this year. Now, Marshall Newhouse is hurt. Bobby Hart, who's a 7th-round draft pick from 2015, is getting a shot. He's done okay. But, they invested a first-round pick in Eric Flowers. So far, he has not shown that he's, that first-round slam dunk left tackle that you thought he would be. A lot of people think he's more suited to the right side. A couple of years ago, you drafted Justin Pugh in the first round because, he was supposed to be your left tackle. He's now become a guard, and a really good guard, but you drafted him to be one of your shutdown tackles. And he's not playing tackle; he's playing guard. You drafted Weston Richburg in the second round of the draft. He's your center, and then you filled in with mid-range free agents on the other side because the guys that you drafted over the last 4 or 5 years have been complete zeros. If the Giants, they're all out of the league. Brandon Mosley, James Brewer were fourth-round picks in back-to-back years. One of those guys should have been a starter on your offensive line. They're already on to their new careers at whatever else they're doing. They no longer play football.
The Ravens have a bunch of that going on too. And a bunch of guys that signed big deals and went elsewhere and didn't make it work. The Art Jones, Pernell McPhee. I mean, they've lost a lot of guys, but the draft has hurt both of these franchises, right? I mean, that really is where it comes down to, that you don't have enough Odell Beckhams or enough Ray Lewises in our case, right?
Yeah, and I mean the Giants, if you just look at the Giants draft record since 2010, it's arguably one of the worst in the NFL. I mean, the amount of second, third, and fourth round picks that went from being drafted by the Giants to being out of the league, like not even playing anywhere else. And when they got released by the Giants, no one else even signed them, which means that 31 of the teams didn't think those players were any good at all. And I think the same thing with the Ravens. I mean, Ozzie Newsome's track record is spectacular. And, when I do my show on the opening job on Sirius XM NFL radio, anytime we talk about the Ravens, you start the conversation with, Ozzie Newsome is one of the best. But if you look at the arc as to why the Ravens have struggled over the last couple of years, and I know injuries have been a factor, but the Ravens have, like all teams, have had injuries. They were able to always play through it because their roster was loaded with depth. They had quality guys. That's not the case. They got a shaky roster.
If you start talking about Matt Elam and Terrence Brooks and Sergio Kindle and Perryman is certainly a question mark. There's a long line of guys. Arthur Brown's another guy. I mean, guys that you sort of memorably remember them dealing picks away to move up 20 spots to get someone in the third round or whatever. And Ozzie was so, deft at that in the late 90s, which is how you win championships. To some degree, Bob, being a guy that's watched this thing for 21 years, as you know, I've watched it, they're getting better. I feel signs of life. I feel like they're going to win 10 games this year. I feel like they're going to win on Sunday. But I do know that they had a code red going on here, and I know that your thoughts on a national level about, hey, where's the talent here? And if somehow the team finishes 6-10 after starting 3-0, Steve Bisciotti's going to have to start asking for some splaining. And it can't be, our guys got injured because we have a franchise quarterback, which we waited a generation to get around here. Same with the Giants. I mean, for those Colts and those, maybe the Broncos have done it, replacing one legend with another. That's a really difficult thing to do. They're still trying to do that half the league, right?
Yeah, the odds of that are slim and none. I mean, Montana to Young, it just doesn't really happen.
And both of us have Super Bowl MVP quarterbacks this week, and when these guys are gone, the next thing you're going to get probably won't look like that. It probably won't look like Peyton and Tom Brady, right?
No, it's probably going to look a lot more like Elvis Gerback and Dave Brown. I mean, but that's just a fact. I mean, that's. The Indianapolis Colts stepped into the luckiest situation that you could have ever happened. That, the 1 year that Peyton Manning doesn't play in a single game happened to be the year that Andrew Luck was coming out. You can't get any luckier than that. I mean, so you sit there and you say to yourself, I look at the Giants drafts and I look at some of the struggles that the Ravens have had, and I said, man, you're messing with the prime of these guys' careers, because once they're gone, the odds are it's going to be, Chris Redman all over again and quarterbacks of that ilk. So you say you see signs of life in Baltimore. I believe you. I don't think the Ravens are going to go 6-10. To me, they feel more like a 9-win team tops. I don't see them winning 10 games.
Well, you've seen their schedule, Bob. I mean,
that's
going to
true.
New England, going to Dallas, Philadelphia's coming in here, and they look like a lamb in the preseason and now look like a lion in October, right? So, and obviously, 2 with Pittsburgh, 2 with Cincinnati. Maybe Cincinnati's taking a little bit of a tumble here. I just think if they can get that O-line healthy and get Stanley on the field and get the continuity, I mean, they haven't played a game with the offensive line that they believed in June, July, and August would be their offensive line. They haven't had a snap where that's been the case.
Yeah, and that's the problem, right? You draft, you put stuff together, and then you envision, and then you never get a chance to see it come to fruition, or at least it hasn't come to. You made a good point about Cincinnati because I'm a big Marvin Lewis fan, and he's appeared on my radio show on Sirius every year since we started back in '04. He does a weekly in season, and I've really gotten to like him.
And I love him, so I'm beyond I'm way over the edge after 2 decades. So it's no secret that he sends me Zubaz that I don't wear.
Yeah, and I think he's done a really good job. And I know people point to the playoff record and everything else, but he's changed the culture in that place. But maybe this year they're just not that good. Maybe the losses of Jones and Sanu are too much. Maybe the running game, just the offensive line is such. Doma Pekka, Geno Atkins, all those guys up front, I've watched them play this year. They don't look like the same guys that they were the last 3 or 4 years.
Well, no one's had more continuity than that.
They're not going to be that good this year.
I mean, yeah.
They're just not going to be good this year.
Well, I mean, from Coughlin, at the end when things weren't going well and you recognized all the jerseys and the names and the numbers because you had won rings with them and, had lost playoff games. But in the end, when you keep continuity that long, I know it's great. I mean, I can name 9 of the guys on the Bengals defense because it's been the same guys the last 6 years. But at some point, they all become 30, and they all become making, $8 million a year instead of on rookie contracts. And to your point, if you're not drafting well and those guys aren't coming in and fulfilling those roles in the wide receiver position, and when you lose a tight end and it really, really affects the balance of your offense, you get struggling teams. You get the Bengals, you get the Giants, you get the Ravens. Bob, is this going to take a turn for the better for the Giants? I mean, I said I see signs of life from the Ravens. I think they will get better. Do you feel that way about the Giants right now?
No, I think there's big concern about the Giants. I really do. I mean, I think they're patching it together defensively because they're ravaged in the secondary with injury. Okay, so I get that part. Not having Apple, not having DRC, not having your starting safety or your backup free safety. It's a big problem. But they've even the other night against the Packers, They gave up a couple drives early, but then they settled in. And, I mean, Aaron Rodgers had a quarterback rating of 65 in the game. I mean, they made him play lousy football. It's just the offense could do nothing. I don't know. It feels like they've got to completely change a lot of or make some significant adjustments offensively. I'm going to give you a stat, right? The Giants have been in 11 personnel. And for your listeners, that's 1 running back, 1 tight end, 3 wide receivers. They've been in 11 personnel for 96% of their offensive snaps this year, which is by far the biggest percentage in the NFL. Last year, the Giants were in 11 personnel, 79% of their offensive snaps for the season. So if you're in the same grouping 96% of the time, and you don't have a blocking tight end, nor do you have a fullback on your roster, so now that really limits what you're doing out of this. You got to think that other teams have figured out some of their route combinations and everything else. And it's like there's only so many things you can do off of those formations. You can bunch them here, bunch them, but it's still 1 back, 1 tight end, 3 receivers.
Well, that would be as vanilla as you could kind of sort of make it. 96. I can't believe anyone in the NFL would do anything 96% of the time, right? I mean, like literally that's a. But look, these things get out of whack as the numbers go along. You look at 5 games. The Ravens every week choose to be unbalanced after all week long saying we're going to establish the run. Hell, last week they ran the ball down the throats of the Redskins on the first drive and then just sort of chose to never run the ball the rest of the day. And I guess that's what cost Trustman his job,
you know, why? By the way, why did they do that? I was watching.
Maybe John Harbaugh asked Mark Trestman the same thing at 4:45 because we were all wondering the same thing.
It's crazy, man. Sometimes offensive coordinators are their worst enemies, and as Carl Banks, my sidekick and two-time Super Bowl champ, has said on the radio many times, you know, think of that big box of Crayola crayons, the box of 64 colors. He's like, you know, sometimes these offensive coordinators have to understand you don't have to use every color. Stick to like the 3 or 4 basics. You don't need to go into the box and show everybody that you have 64 colors. If the 4 colors are working and making a beautiful picture, keep doing it until they stop it.
Bob, we had a day where the wind was swirling 15, 20, 25 miles an hour off of the hurricane, and we had our kicker throw a pass. You know what I mean? Like, there were some decisions made along the way that are incredibly curious, you know, in a lot of ways. And a lot of things have gone wrong. I mean, C.J. Mosley came 18 inches away from holding the ball into the end zone, and the Ravens win, and they're 4-1, and it smells different and it tastes different. But, you know, that's the league. The league is usually about a play or two that don't go the right way, and you're still talking about it weeks later. Bob Papa is here. He does a million things, including the voice of the New York Football Giants. I need to ask you about Odell Beckham. I need to ask you about Eric Flowers, and just sort of like weird, bad behavior. And I know New York's like a little bit more of a pressure cooker than maybe we have in Owings Mills. But, you know, the Beckham thing, it feels like that's part of the game plan now is to mess with this kid, and that's what gets him to not be so special on a Sunday.
Yeah, there's no question about that. I mean, teams are definitely using guys to agitate him. It's like hockey. You know, you got the one guy on your team that's sort of the agitator. Yeah, I mean, look, try to get him kicked out of the game. Try to get a personal foul. Try to get him to react. He didn't do any of that the other night. I don't know how hard the Packers tried to necessarily get under his skin. It seemed as if they were just sort of playing ball. But you know, I think externally, it's been a much bigger story than it is internally.
Okay, fair enough.
In the sense that, you know, people keep asking me, how's Odell? What's it like? How is it? You know, I'm like, look, first of all, he has been so engaging this year as far as when he's in the cafeteria. You know, he always interacts great with his teammates.
But he's an extrovert, right? I mean, by nature. But if he weren't a football player, he'd be the guy working somewhere to be talking to everybody. I sort of see him as that guy.
It's interesting because I would say it was quite the opposite.
Really? Okay.
He was more of an introvert
in high school.
In my dealings with him. But I know there was a noticeable difference this year. You know, doing some public speaking things with him, doing some other things with him. There was like a whole different side. He was much more reserved. He was shy in the first 2 years. I did a whole bunch of things with him, and if he was not around a lot of people that he knew, he was almost like withdrawing, shy kind of thing.
Bob, we take this for granted, dude. You've been doing this 3 decades. I come to New York, and sometimes it feels like it could swallow anybody up. It's big. It really, I mean, you know what I mean? Like, and not everybody can react to it and go on and be Tiki Barber or Michael Strahan, right? It's not for everybody.
No, and it took those guys a while to become those guys. It took them to get deep in their career. This guy was a superstar as a rookie.
Well, he made that catch. I mean, I was in New Orleans that night, walking on Bourbon Street. I looked up and like, he did what? You know, I mean, what? And then once you saw that, you never forgot his name, and he's been a star, you know, really from the beginning, right?
Yeah, I mean, he has more receptions and more receiving yards in the first 30 games of his NFL career than any receiver in the history of the sport. I mean, he's played 32 games in the National Football League, and 17 of those games he's had 100 yards receiving. He's got 26 touchdowns in 32 career games. I mean, even though he's in what's perceived as a slump, his numbers are still off the chart. But this year he's been so much more engaging. He's been fun to be around. He's let a whole bunch of other people sort of into his circle as far as just the way he deals with the media, very professional. He looks you in the eye, answers the questions. He doesn't give you stock answers. He speaks from the heart. So when people say all this stuff's going on, I'm like, yeah, I mean, Odell's fine. And the teammates are fine. Everybody internally is fine. It's this big firestorm that's been on the outside that which is, I think, one of the reasons why you didn't see anything the other night. I think they're all on board on how this has to be handled moving forward.
Well, Bob, I would just say this and having, a little perspective. I turned 48 on Friday this week, too. So, I am now the guy with the silver and seeing these kids, these 21, 22, 23-year-old kids that you and I see together out in Indianapolis at the Combine. And, they come into the league. And as the judgment goes further, all you'd like to say is that guy will be a better guy when he's 30 than he was when he was 20 because the league sort of demands that, right? I mean, it sort of, to some degree, spits out the turds. They're the ones we hear about, in the blotter and whatnot. Those are the guys that don't get the second contract and certainly don't get the third contract. And then there are the guys that sort of, you look at him and say, third year in the league. He's getting better. I've seen that with Joe Flacco and Ray Lewis, a lot of the great players. You see them come in green in some way, whether they went to Delaware or whether they went to Miami. The big city is, and the NFL and the Shield and the coaching and all that, there really is a lot of adjustment that I don't think fans really understand, and I have much more sympathy for being on the inside of it. Not for knuckleheads or guys who are jerks, but guys who may come in as a knucklehead or a jerk, but come out 4 years later being better in a lot of different ways, not just on the football field.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good point. I mean, it is, they come in as kids and, which ones start to mature, and a lot of times the light goes on for them once they get through that first or second year on just getting into a rhythm of being a professional athlete and kind of just figuring it out, as they like to say. We say that all the time on golf with these rookies that come on tour, and you're going from place to place to place, and you're booking your own hotel, and those guys book their own travel, and they don't know where to eat. They're not really sure where to stay, and they stay maybe a spot that they think is good, but it's too far from the golf course, or maybe it's too close from the golf course, and all the people that are at the golf course wind up going and hang out and the guy wants that. So
but it's a road trip that never ends when you're a golfer or a bowler, right? I mean, or tennis. I mean, other than rotation, if you make it 2, 3, 4 years on the tour, you go back to that city again. But it really is like being in a rock and roll band for the first time, right? I mean, it's doing the laundry, like the whole thing, right?
Yeah, and the guys learn, and they learn how to pick their spots. They learn what makes them most comfortable, and I think we see that with football players and all professional athletes. They eventually develop a rhythm of being a pro, and everything sort of slows down and they sort of relax a little bit. And I think that's what we're seeing in year 3 from Odell Beckham Jr. And I'm sure your listeners are like, man, is this Papa guy on crack or something? He's talking about Odell Beckham Jr. relaxing. Trust me, folks, internally, what's going on behind the scenes publicly, he's a much more relaxed figure.
Bob Papa, if you go to his Twitter at BobPapa_NFL, you'll see a picture of Odell Beckham's head on your shirt or his tats. What is that, Bob?
Well, so so like a lot of these celebrity athletes, now the new thing is for these guys to come out with their own line of emojis, right?
Right. So okay.
So Odell's selling, or he's got his own line of Odell emojis that came out this summer. So one of the beat reporters for the Giants, I guess, bought the Odell set of emojis because that's what reporters do, and I'm sure the reporter expensed it, and he used, he said, part of his research to see what Odell's hundreds of emojis look like. And that's one of the emojis.
Okay.
It is an Odell Beckham emoji with a T-shirt on, and it has my name on it.
Perfect, man. I mean, that's outstanding. By the way, one of our longtime, not one, I mean, the number one caller, I don't take calls anymore, Bob. I only talk to guys like you about sports. I mean, this past week with firing offensive coordinators and the decision of Buck Showalter, it was a dream for Twitter and Facebook and sports radio callers and anguished people and all that. But I don't do that anymore. And, I guess at where we are at this point with Twitter and your ability to keep up with people and hear and see what goes on the street, even in the middle of Oklahoma where you were this week doing golf stuff, it sort of never leaves anymore, does it? I mean, it surrounds you on your phone and in your life, right? It's one never-ending sports radio conversation, isn't it?
Well, that's 100% true. That is 100. You are never away from the conversation. It's. I was in Oklahoma for Golf Channel, long drive, world long drive championship. And so, 7-8 years ago, I would be here in Oklahoma, and I'd be, going on Giants.com to see what was going on back home. Maybe I'd be emailing some guys back there, and, hey, what's going on at the facility? Oh, they signed Cody Sensabaugh. Oh, how's everything going? Now it's like, open up your phone, you go on Twitter, and, everything is just right there. Nothing ever escapes you.
Let me give you the story of the week, man. When Trestman gets fired on Monday, I'm in here doing radio at 9 o'clock in the morning, and I literally went out to refresh my coffee. My wife works in the other room now. She's an engineer, and she, so we work in the same place all day, which is a little, different for marriage, for life, whatever. And I walked out, and she said to me, they just fired Trestman. And I'm like, the hell are you talking about? She said, look at your phone. My phone with my report from my reporter telling me on my text service, brought to you by Coons Florida Security Boulevard, that Mark Trestman was fired. So that's how I figured out. I got it on my own text service, and I didn't even look at my phone. My wife informed me on a coffee break. So that's how the world works now, right?
Oh, yeah, exactly. Exactly. It's on your phone. Dude, look at your phone.
I know.
Right there in your phone.
I don't know how you do it. You do so many things. Anything you want to plug. You do so many good things in the world. You run around. You do radio shows, TV shows, Sirius. You're the voice of the Giants. You have fun emojis with Odell Beckham Jr. But I know you're always doing something, Bob.
Yeah, well, listen, I know that there are Giants fans that are listening, and if you want more Giants info, I have 3 podcasts. And one's a Giants-specific podcast, the Papa Cast, Giants Cast, which you can get on iTunes and all the other places you get podcasts, which is separate from the Papa Cast, which is more of a general sports podcast, more in-depth, like magazine-style interviews. And then there's the Papa Cast, Golf Cast, which airs through Golf Channel. But for the purposes of this, go Papa Cast, Giants Cast for all the Giants fans out there.
I wanted to tell you this. This is where I got distracted a couple minutes ago in talking about social media, but and your crazy emote. Yeah, I got distracted. I did. Sometimes I'm not focused. Our number one caller over 20 years of having a radio station is a guy who called himself Papa Bob. Now, his real name was not Bob, but I did know his real name. He was an older fella. He's still listening. I'm sure he's out there right now listening. But his name was Papa Bob on the radio, so you're Bob Papa. I didn't just a little trivia, WNST trivia.
I like that.
Papa
like
Bob.
Maybe,
one day you'll be Papa Bob, but for now you're Bob Papa.
Well, I am a Papa Bob. I've got 4 boys, so
West Point, I hear, right? The good stuff going on, right?
My oldest, he's at West Point, and then you can dial that all the way down to a 21-month-old. So I've got the gamut covered.
I don't know how you do it, dude. I think there's 3 of you. Love you. Appreciate you. See you Sunday at the Meadowlands, man. Thanks for the time, as always.
All right. Have a safe train ride up.
Oh, I'm busting it, man. We got a whole busload of Raven crazies we're bringing up, Bob. No worries. We'll bring some purple up there.
Oh, you're going bus. Nice. Party bus.
Well, yeah, anything. People ask me about the bus and the experience. I said it's better than a limo because you can stand up and use the bathroom. So it's great.
Good point.
See you later, Bob. Happy travels, man. Get home safely from Oklahoma. There he goes, Bob Papa _NFL is the way to find him out on Twitter. One of the really good dudes in our business. The voice of the New York Giants, and it gives me a great excuse to call him this week and do some great radio with a dude that I love listening to on Sirius NFL. He has his podcasts. I do not listen to your golf coverage, Bob, because I'm not the golf guy, but I know you are. That's your thing. I'm busy doing stuff. Golf. Masters weekend, I'll watch golf. That's what I do. You can find me out in the Bayou Toyota Audio Vault 24 hours a day from anywhere in the world in the Bayou Toyota Audio Vault. Download the TuneIn Radio app, and like Bob Papa and I say, we all come in anywhere you are, we are. WNST.net, AM 1570 and WNST Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports. All that, and of course the Terps entertaining the Golden Gophers of Minnesota at noon on Saturday, trying to get another victory after the mess up in State College last weekend. We'll be boarding the bus, so we are taking some Ravens fans